These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Two young members of Josip Tito's partisan movement stand for a quick photo in 1943. On the left is Fana Kokovska, age 15, the youngest person to receive Yugoslavia's Order of the National Hero. This civilian identity card comes from Guernsey in the Channel Islands and was issued by German occupation authorities during World War II, with every field printed in both English and German. Women in tall pointed hats share a Halloween tea in Norfolk, England, in 1929. The staged group photo captures local costume fun between the wars, a playful nod to village folklore. Nikola Tesla examines a row of his early induction motors during a public display in 1898. These alternating current machines turned changing magnetic fields into smooth rotation, a design that powered factories and homes for decades. This hand-painted deck is the oldest surviving complete set of playing cards, made in the late 15th century. Cut by hand and colored with tempera on paper, it shows early European suits and court figures. A twin-boom Focke-Wulf FW-189 reconnaissance plane sits disabled in a field on the Eastern Front. Called the Flying Eye for its wide view, this light scout helped commanders map lines and spot movement across huge distances. After 1945, many Japanese servicemen in Korea were required to return to Japan, leaving Korean wives and children during the mass repatriation. This photo shows a father giving a careful goodbye to his young son before boarding transport home. Italian Alpini soldiers climb a cliff in the Dolomites in 1915. These mountain troops opened routes over high passes on the Italian front against Austria-Hungary to move men and supplies. Union soldiers sit outside Price, Birch and Company in Washington, District of Columbia, a former slave-trading jail photographed during the Civil War. The city ended the trade in 1850 and abolished slavery in 1862. A young woman in the Belgian Congo displays ceremonial scarification, photographed in 1935. The shoulder motifs include an ancient hooked cross used for good fortune. This U.S. Army immunization register from the 1940s lists smallpox, typhoid, tetanus, cholera, and typhus shots, with dates and doctors' initials. Service members carried cards like this during the war to track doses across bases and ships. Sprinters line up for the 100-meter final at the first modern Olympic Games in Athens in 1896. American runner Thomas Burke won in 11.8 seconds, and introduced the low crouch start that soon became standard worldwide. Young men linked to the 5 Points group pose in New York City in the late 1800s. This lower Manhattan crew produced later Prohibition names like Johnny Torrio and Al Capone, and showed how street groups evolved into larger networks. Inside a Salvation Army 4-penny coffin shelter in England around 1900, rows of coffin-shaped wooden beds gave people a dry place to sleep for 4 pence. Unlike the cheaper 2-penny rope rooms that forced people to sit up, this option let them lie flat and rest through the night. In a 1-penny sit-up shelter in England around 1900, people could sit indoors on benches until morning, but were not allowed to lie down. Attendants walked the aisles all night to wake anyone who started to fall asleep. A hard hat diver steps off a pier into the water in 1915, tethered to the surface by an air hose and lifeline. The heavy canvas suit and brass helmet let him walk the seabed to do repairs and salvage work in harbors. A local Tennessee paper profiles 15-year-old Taylor Swift after her family moved to Hendersonville to grow her country music career. The article notes she was set to perform at the U.S. Army All-American Bowl in San Antonio. These training cases taught customs officers how to spot contraband in the 1970s and 1980s. The kit held realistic replicas, packaging, and test vials, so trainees could learn signs without handling real material. Newsboys gather outside Skeeter's Branch on Jefferson near Franklin in St. Louis around 1910, papers tucked under their arms. Street vendors like these worked long hours and helped drive child labor reforms in the following decade. A masked dancer performs in Côte d'Ivoire in 1954, wearing a long carved crocodile head with raffia trim for a village ceremony. 4 women in Maryland pose with the gear they used to protect their block in 1950. After weeks of trouble from a group of men, they confronted them, made them give up, and waited for police to arrive. Men in heavy sheepskin coats and felt boots walk past a tea room on a muddy street in provincial Russia in the early 1900s. The sign reads, "Tea House and Canteen, a quick slice of everyday town life on a winter day." Aboriginal Australian ceremony, early 1900s. Performers are covered in pipe clay and feather down, with one wearing a long curved mask and another holding a very tall decorated pole. The Italian motor torpedo boat, MS-15, runs light across the Adriatic in 1918 with 2 torpedoes on deck. On 10 June, it struck the Austro-Hungarian battleship Szent István off Bermuda, sinking it and making this small craft famous. Salvation Army volunteers known as Donut Girls hand out fresh treats to American soldiers in 1917. Their comfort work on the front later inspired National Donut Day, first observed in 1938 to support relief efforts. Fyodor Chaliapin, the great Russian bass, poses in a dramatic stage costume in Moscow in 1908. Known for powerful voice and vivid character work, he helped reshape opera acting for modern audiences. A high steel worker balances on a beam in 1931, lining up his finger with the distant spire of the Chrysler Building. The Chrysler Building was the tallest in the world for part of 1930, before the Empire State Building surpassed it in 1931. Gerald Ford, number 48, stands with teammate Willis Ward, number 61, on Michigan's 1934 football team. That season, a visiting school refused to play against Ward because of a racial ban, and Ford nearly quit in protest. Brooklyn Supreme, a Belgian draft horse shown in the early 1930s, was billed as the largest horse of his time. He stood 19.2 hands and weighed about 3,200 pounds, drawing crowds wherever he appeared. A boy sells paper bags of pecans by the roadside near Alma, Georgia in 1937. New Deal photographers documented scenes like this across the rural South to show daily life and a crop that supported many towns. Hundreds of U.S. Army biplanes sweep across Manhattan in a mass formation flyover in 1931. The display showed how quickly military aviation had expanded since World War I, as tight formations crossed the skyline in minutes. An early jaw splint clamps the lower jaw with metal bars and bands, photographed in France in 1890. Doctors used adjustable frames like this to hold the bone steady so the mouth could heal and teeth stayed aligned. A studio trick portrait from Wisconsin in 1896 creates a living bust, with the woman posed through a draped stand as the sculptor pretends to carve. Novelty scenes like this were popular in late 19th century photo parlors for their playful illusion. Officer Herman Schlichting of the police payroll squad poses beside a city car during a 1932 escort run, holding a Thompson. In the early 1930s, many departments created payroll details to safeguard cash transfers for businesses and offices. Mickey Mouse makes his first appearance in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in 1934, sailing above the rainy New York crowds. The huge balloon was designed by Disney artists and built by Goodyear, kicking off decades of character balloons in the holiday parade. Winston Churchill lays bricks at his Chartwell estate in the late 1920s, a hobby he took up between political battles. Bricklaying calmed him so much that he joined the Building Trade Workers Union as an honorary member. Lou Gehrig covers his ears while teammate Babe Ruth tries a saxophone, a light moment from the Yankees' late 1920s era. The pair were the game's biggest stars, and photos like this showed their off-field friendship and showman spirit. This early battery-powered mining lamp was made by Freeman and Wolf of Zwickau, Germany, with a cage and handle to protect the bulb. It clipped onto mine carts and small locomotives in the 1950s. Amelia Earhart stands on the roof of London's Hyde Park Hotel in the early 1930s. Fresh from her solo Atlantic flight, she toured Europe and drew large crowds wherever she went. Amelia Earhart stands on the roof of London's Hyde Park Hotel in the early 1930s. Fresh from her solo Atlantic flight, she toured Europe and drew large crowds wherever she went. An old mortise gauge used by woodworkers to scribe two parallel lines for a tight mortise and tenon joint. The brass slider sets the spacing, while the steel pins score the wood along a straight edge. French colonial officers pose with their families in West Africa in 1915, photographed in what is now Ghana. Cross-border marriages and partnerships were common around garrisons and ports, linking Ivory Coast service with life on the Gold Coast. Sami herders stand with harnessed reindeer in northern Sweden in 1939, wearing fur for deep winter travel. Reindeer pulled sleds across snow and ice, a transport system the Sami perfected for moving families and goods over long distances. A Maori priest is fed with a long carved feeding tube called a korere, photographed in New Zealand in 1930. The tube was used when ritual rules barred hand-to-mouth eating or when lips were swollen after facial tattooing. French troops model breastplates at Fort de la Peigne in 1918, showing bullet marks from controlled tests. The plates were fired on while mounted on stands, not worn, to measure protection for trench duty. A beach in Iran in 1976 shows two styles side by side, bikinis and a full wrap, common on busy shores then. Before 1979, urban resorts often mixed Western swimwear with traditional dress in the same crowd. A physician in China listens to a patient's lungs around 1890, wearing a hooded coat and cloth mask for protection. Early public health workers used simple face coverings and stethoscopes like this during outbreaks in crowded cities. Offenders in late 19th century China wear wooden kangwei collars that made movement hard and display public. The boards listed names and charges, and people relied on others for food until officials removed the collar. A newspaper boy in a cloth mask stands outside a cinema closed by city order during the influenza pandemic in 1918. Cities across Britain and beyond shut theaters, schools, and meeting halls to slow the spread while papers carried daily updates. These hinged steel arms are ladder jacks, used to support a work plank between two ladders. Roofers and painters hooked them over the rungs to make a quick, adjustable platform. These are replaceable bullet teeth from a rock drill, the conical tips that bite into stone on mining and road-cut rigs. The worn steel bodies once held hard inserts and were swapped out as they dulled during blasting and excavation in the Arizona mountains. Italian heiress and art muse Marchesa Luisa Casati appears in 1928 as Light, wearing a starburst costume for one of her legendary balls. She inspired artists from Giovanni Boldini to Man Ray and was famed for turning life into theater, even strolling Rome with pet cheetahs. Spa-Francorchamps, 1962. A Formula One car burns by the roadside while the field races past, a stark glimpse of the era's ultra-minimal safety. No safety car, few barriers, and marshals on foot. The driver climbed out with only minor injuries. A street fishmonger in Italy holds up live crabs for buyers in 1950, with a crowd and balance scale ready for quick sales. Coastal markets prized live catch because movement proved freshness, a tradition that still guides seafood buying today. An improvised "'Tis Now" armored car built by CNTFAI workshops in 1938 wraps heavy sheet steel over a truck chassis with a small turret for a light weapon. These home-built vehicles were used for convoy escort and street fighting. This is a vintage bookstrap with two wooden handles. The canvas ends unroll to wrap around a stack of books and cinch tight for carrying. Before backpacks became common in the early and mid-20th century, students used straps like this to keep textbooks together on the walk to school. Craftsmen in Korea set river stones into a timber frame, packing them with clay and straw to form thick walls in 1909. This stone plus wattle and daub method kept homes cool in summer and warm in winter. In 1903, Whittier, California, mules toe-tiered picking towers through a walnut orchard so crews can climb up and hand-harvest the highest branches. Before mechanical shakers arrived decades later, growers used mobile platforms and ground sheets to clear trees fast across big groves. Uniformed boys haul suitcases at a New South Wales rail station in 1936, part of the era's junior porter programs. Such jobs taught station routines and paid a small wage. A man sits on a curb in Valdivia after the 1960 Chile earthquake, with streets lined by broken masonry. At magnitude 9.5, the strongest ever recorded, it sent tsunamis across the Pacific and even altered nearby rivers and lakes. Bomber crew quarters on Adak Island in the Aleutians in 1943 are plastered with magazine pinups, a morale wall against months of fog, wind, and isolation. From this remote base, U.S. airmen flew stormy missions against enemy positions. This heavy U-shaped pipe with a cement-filled block is the counterweight base from an arc floor lamp. The base slides behind a sectional or sofa, so the long arm can reach over seating without tipping. Women in China pose in 1912 wearing tiny lotus shoes after years of foot binding, a tradition once linked to status and marriage. That same year, the new republic issued a national ban, and reform groups began persuading families to let girls' feet grow naturally. At major stations in the early 20th century, attendants rolled out beam scales to weigh trunks, and often the traveler too, when calculating excess baggage charges. The Pullman step in view hints this was taken on a U.S. platform. An early 20th century respirator pairs wraparound goggles and a mouthpiece hose with twin canisters that filtered irritant vapors. Designs like this protected troops and factory crews from gas hazards during the First World War. Passengers play cards aboard Pan American's Sikorsky S-40 flying boat in 1931, among the first four-engine airliners in U.S. commercial service. Nicknamed American Clipper, it opened long overwater routes to the Caribbean and Latin America. B-17s pushed through a sky filled with flak over Merseburg in 1944, one of the most heavily defended targets. Crews flew tight box formations so overlapping guns could protect the group while bomb aimers held course through the bursts. In 1975, Kodak engineer Stephen Sasson built the first self-contained digital camera, about 8 pounds, roughly 0.01 megapixel, and it saved each photo to a cassette tape in about 23 seconds. A spring-loaded olive or sugar cube grabber. Push the top to open the little claws, release to grip and lift items from jars or drinks. Popular on bar carts and tea trays in the mid-20th century, it kept fingers dry and plates tidy. Before it was Times Square, this crossroads was called Longacre Square. Carriages, trolleys, and early theaters filled the block in 1898. It was renamed in 1904 when the New York Times moved here. Workers stand atop the RBMK core at Chernobyl in the late 1970s, each opening a channel for a fuel assembly or a control rod. The honeycomb grid holds over 1,000 pressure tubes, an unusual design that allowed refueling while operating and pushed huge electrical output. Tolkien began The Lord of the Rings in 1937 after the success of The Hobbit, handwriting early pages like this one and revising for over a decade. This draft opens, when Bilbo, son of Bungo, France's Vespa 150 Tap paired a lightweight scooter with a 75mm recoilless rifle for paratroop teams in 1956. Typically, two scooters worked together, one carrying the tube, the other the rounds, and the gun was meant to be fired from a ground mount, not the handlebars. Marilyn Monroe slips into opera gloves as 20th Century Fox stylist Gladys Rasmussen readies her for the 1953 premiere of How to Marry a Millionaire. The comedy, shot in new CinemaScope with gowns by William Travilla. Hard drives in 1981 cost thousands of dollars for only a few megabytes. Almost unbelievable today. At that time, even 5 megabytes felt like owning futuristic technology. In 1976, Steve Jobs sold the first Apple I computer from a garage for $600. Decades later, collectors paid hundreds of thousands at auction for this legendary piece of tech history. In the 1940s, a special Atoms for Peace bus traveled to schools and hospitals to share new scientific knowledge. This mysterious mobile lab introduced people to the emerging power and promise of atomic energy. In 1992, iconic bands Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Red Hot Chili Peppers played together for just a few dollars. This legendary concert ticket shows how some of music's biggest names shared the same stage before they became legends. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy shared a joyful moment as his children dressed up in playful Halloween costumes inside the White House. In 1978, Christopher Reeve transformed his physique through intense training to become Superman for the big screen. This behind-the-scenes moment captures how the role demanded real-life strength worthy of a superhero legend. In 1887, Manhattan streets became a tangled maze as telephone wires covered the sky in a wild web. This shocking sight marked the start of a communication revolution, but looked almost surreal to anyone walking below. The Lincoln Futura, designed in the 1950s, stunned the world with its futuristic looks and bubble canopy. Years later, this wild concept car was transformed into the unforgettable Batmobile for the classic television series. This is not the famous 1963 British train robbery. This still comes from the classic film The Great Train Robbery from 1903, often called the world's first action movie. In 1915, the Masked Marvel became America's first famous masked wrestler, thrilling crowds at the Manhattan Opera House. His mysterious identity and powerful style sparked the masked wrestling craze that still dominates today's arenas. In 1918, massive halls were filled with rows of patients as the world battled a mysterious and deadly influenza pandemic. The sight of masked nurses and desperate faces marked one of history's most haunting medical emergencies. Contestants in the British holiday camp beauty contest at Butlins Clacton-on-Sea in 1952 wore papier-mâché Marilyn Monroe masks. This was done to ensure judging was based only on their bodies, not faces. In 1893, British explorer Sir Alfred Edward Pease photographed one of the last wild Barbary lions in Algeria. The Barbary lion, known for its dark mane, became extinct in the wild soon after that year. Photograph shows the interior of a German torture chamber in Belgium during World War II. The image includes wooden coffins and various mechanical devices documented by Allied investigators in 1944. Hospital ship USNS Mercy was commissioned in December 1986 as one of the largest floating medical centers in the world. Its mission includes rapid deployment for disaster relief and humanitarian emergencies. In 1939, Marinette, Wisconsin hosted smelt wrestling matches as part of its annual Smelt Carnival Festival. Contestants competed in a ring filled with slippery fish, packed for entertainment and local tradition. In 1961, Cuban militiamen rode to the Bay of Pigs to defend the country against a United States-backed invasion force. The failed landing marked a turning point for Cuban revolutionary forces and Cold War politics. This antique wooden box is a ballot box designed for secret voting using black and white balls. One black ball can be enough to reject a proposal or deny membership, making the voting process both anonymous and decisive. Mount Shishaldin is the tallest peak in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, rising to 2,860 meters. This photo was taken during an aerial survey in 1932, with a biplane flying past the volcano's smoking summit. In 1962, recovery personnel examined the Mercury Atlas 8 space capsule after it splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. The capsule carried astronaut Wally Schirra on a 6-orbit mission lasting over 9 hours. In 1978, the original Hollywood sign was in such poor condition that several letters had collapsed and paint was heavily weathered. That year, the sign was completely rebuilt with a more durable steel structure. On March 17, 1969, Chinese border guards on Damansky, Zhenbao Island, displayed a damaged Soviet helmet during the Sino-Soviet border conflict. Tensions erupted in multiple armed clashes along the Ussuri River that year. On March 18, 1944, Mount Vesuvius erupted near Naples, Italy, sending a massive ash cloud into the sky. The eruption buried surrounding villages and damaged Allied military aircraft stationed nearby. In November 1951, Chinese soldiers were photographed throwing rocks at advancing South Korean troops during the Battle of Triangle Hill. This event occurred when Chinese forces exhausted their ammunition in one of the bloodiest battles of the Korean War. This is an antique wooden music box with interchangeable cylinders, allowing different melodies to be played by swapping components. The decorative design and storage drawer are typical of late 19th century music boxes. In 1976, Nintendo released Kosenju Duck Hunt, a physical shooting game using a toy rifle and projector setup. Players aimed at moving targets on the screen, a decade before the famous Duck Hunt video game for Nintendo consoles. A Soviet World War II veteran reaches for a uniform covered with medals while lying in bed. The image shows service awards earned during his military career in the Soviet Armed Forces. During World War II, Russian Orthodox priests blessed Red Army soldiers before battle in the Soviet Union. Stalin temporarily permitted religious ceremonies from 1941 to raise troop morale after years of anti-religious repression. In 1916, French soldiers used flamethrowers during the Battle of Verdun in World War I. Flamethrowers created intense fire barriers and were used to clear enemy trenches and fortifications. In 1962, a CIA case officer was secretly photographed at a dead drop site in Moscow during Cold War espionage operations. Dead drops enabled covert exchange of intelligence material between agents and informants. On June 22, 1941, Moscow citizens gathered to listen to the government's radio announcement about the German invasion at 4 o'clock that morning. More than 30% of Soviet males died during World War II. 90% of men born in 1923 were killed. In 1908, X-rays showed the effects of corset use on the female torso. The left image shows compressed ribs with a corset, while the right image shows a natural rib position without a corset. In 17th to 19th century Japan, blackened teeth, ohaguro, were a traditional sign of female beauty. The practice was considered stylish, signifying marital status and social rank. Madame Rowley's toilet mask, also called a face glove, was marketed in late 19th century America as a product for refining and beautifying the complexion. The mask was to be worn a few times per week and promised to remove blemishes, wrinkles, and skin impurities while users slept. The photo shows the cipher book of the French court of the 16th century with a mechanical combination lock. Such rare books were used to store secret information, opened only with the right combination on rotating encryption disks. The passport shows a Japanese transit visa issued by Consul Chiune Sugihara in Kaunas, Lithuania in 1940. Sugihara saved about 6,000 Jews by issuing them visas to travel to Japan, contrary to the orders of the Japanese government. The photograph used for the ending scene of The Shining was originally taken at a party in 1923. Jack Nicholson's face was carefully edited into the historic group shot, resulting in the film's iconic final image. On the left, actor Robert Duvall holds a prop with the text of lines for Marlon Brando during the filming of The Godfather. According to rumors, Brando read the text from the leaves throughout the shooting of the film in order to preserve the spontaneity of the game and not learn the script. Muhammad Ali is jokingly trying to lift 76-year-old former world bantamweight champion Johnny Coulomb. The pendant demonstrates the famous trick. It rests its fingers on the neck and wrist of an opponent, becoming almost weightless and not allowing itself to be lifted even by a strong athlete. The photo shows two types of Lombard Street in San Francisco. In 1922, the street was just built, and in 2018 it was surrounded by greenery and became a popular tourist attraction. In March 1995, a major terrorist attack was prevented in the Tokyo subway at Shinjuku Station. An employee discovered a burning package with poisonous gas and extinguished it before combining with another chemical substance. If an explosion had occurred, the number of victims could have reached 20,000 people. The world's first speeding conviction was given to Walter Arnold of Kent, England, for driving at 8 miles per hour in 1896. Authorities fined him for breaking the 2 miles per hour speed limit that existed at the time. Simo Häyhä, known as the White Death, was a Finnish sniper who had more than 500 confirmed kills during World War II. He used only metal sights on his rifle to avoid reflecting sunlight and survived a severe facial injury from an explosive bullet, later returning to the ranks. This is a 19th century bidet stand designed to hold a ceramic bowl for personal washing in the absence of modern plumbing. The indented, squash-shaped seat and sturdy legs allowed comfortable use while seated, with thigh cutouts for easy access. A group of exhausted and grimy U.S. Marines take a break with mugs of coffee after a brutal World War II battle in the 1940s. Their dirt-covered faces and worn expressions show the hardship of combat in the Pacific Theater. In Chicago, Illinois, 1967, a little girl mimics a roar at a stuffed grizzly bear display at the Sportsman's Show in the Chicago Coliseum. The playful interaction captures a child face-to-face with a symbol of North American wildlife in a safe exhibition setting. These photos show an antique gramophone cabinet. One side stores vinyl records, while the other side houses the horn and turntable sound box. The sound exits through a decorative grate, and opening the cabinet door functions as a mechanical volume control. In 1917, the U.S. War Industries Board asked American women to stop buying corsets to conserve metal for World War I production. This led to a surge in popularity and development of the modern bra, which used less metal and became fashionable for various figures, as seen in this period advertisement. Francis Pegamagabau, a Canadian Indigenous sniper, achieved 378 confirmed kills and captured over 300 enemy soldiers in World War I. After the war, he became a leading advocate for Indigenous rights and remains the most decorated Indigenous veteran in Canadian military history. In 1942, 22 Australian Army nurses were captured on Bangka Island by Japanese forces during World War II. The nurses were forced into the sea and killed, with only one survivor, Vivian Bullwinkle, who was later silenced about the atrocities. This photo shows Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, the cousins of Queen Elizabeth II, who suffered from mental retardation and lived most of their lives in a specialized institution. Tanks were first used by the British during World War I, but their reliability was low. Early models often broke down, got stuck in the mud, or became an easy target for artillery. Aerial photo of the Western Front during World War I shows a devastated battlefield filled with thousands of shell craters and trench networks. The landscape bears the scars of heavy artillery, mine detonations, and relentless trench warfare between Allied and German forces. In the early 20th century, some believed that inhaling certain gases could alleviate flu symptoms. The woman in the photo uses a medical inhalation apparatus, reflecting period experiments with respiratory treatments before the development of modern antiviral drugs. This is a 19th century leaching kit containing glass cups, a burning pencil for creating a vacuum, and vessels for storing leeches. Such kits were commonly used in medical bloodletting practices. Harriet Hubbard, Ayers Moth and Freckle Lotion, is an example of an early cosmetic product advertised for the removal of freckles and blemishes from the face. Such lotions were popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Ava Gardner is seen getting fitted for a costume on the set of The Barefoot Contessa in 1954. The film is a Hollywood classic, and this candid behind-the-scenes moment shows the meticulous preparation involved in wardrobe for golden-era cinema. This is a 19th century dipleidoscope, an optical instrument used to determine the exact time of local noon by observing the position of the sun. The box contains the main viewing device, a compass for orientation, and sometimes accessories like a magnifier or a leveling tool. Quentin Roosevelt France, the youngest son of President Theodore Roosevelt, was a pilot in World War I and was killed in aerial combat over France in 1918. He is the only child of a U.S. president to have died in combat. During World War I, Germany tried to buy up every hydraulic press produced in the United States for 2 years, aiming to disrupt Allied artillery shell production by monopolizing a critical piece of manufacturing equipment. Such presses were essential for shaping metal components for munitions. During World War I, the German government conducted a census of Jewish soldiers, hoping to show they were absent from the war effort. But results revealed Jews were disproportionately represented on the front lines and served in significant numbers. The 1919 Tour de France had the fewest finishers in race history, largely due to the poor condition of French roads after World War I. Wartime destruction left many routes nearly impassable, challenging even the toughest cyclists. Stephen King's first major press notice appeared in the early 1970s after Doubleday purchased the hardcover rights to his novel, Carrie, for $2,500 plus royalties. The paperback rights were later sold for a reported $400,000, launching King into national literary fame. A diner waitress in the mid-20th century points to a sign reading, "Sorry, you were rude to me, so now you get no hot dog," highlighting how service workers once set boundaries with customers in the 1940s and 1950s. Rare photo was taken inside Japan Airlines Flight 123 as oxygen masks dropped and passengers braced for impact during the catastrophic 1985 incident. The Boeing 747 later crashed into Mount Takamagahara after suffering explosive decompression. In 1958, a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house could be advertised for just $11,190 or $87 a month, reflecting how dramatically the housing market and affordability have changed over the decades. This historic real estate ad highlights mid-century optimism around home ownership in America. This tool is a churi, a heavy, spiral-bladed knife traditionally used in carpet weaving. The blade's curled tip helps artisans cut and finish carpet fibers with control and precision. Paparazzo Ron Galella is seen wearing a football helmet while photographing Marlon Brando. Galella began using the helmet as protection after Brando previously punched him, breaking his jaw, highlighting the tense relationship between celebrities and aggressive photographers in the 1970s. In 1960s Detroit, swim mobiles were portable pools placed on trucks to provide children a safe and fun way to cool off during hot summers. This creative solution was part of city initiatives to offer recreation and relief in urban neighborhoods. The Atari demo booth was released to promote Atari home computers in stores. The photo shows the Atari 400 and Atari 800 models, game and training cartridges, a monitor for testing programs, and a showcase with product packages. April 1975, Saigon. This rooftop evacuation was part of the largest helicopter rescue in history during the last days of the Vietnam War. Thousands of people lined up in a desperate attempt to escape the advancing North Vietnamese forces. American Marines are seen shirtless, taking target practice on the deck of a ship, turning a routine drill into an unforgettable spectacle. This rare photo captures military training in the open ocean under the sun. Titanic survivors wait in line to receive shipwreck pay in a formal office. This rare photo captures one of the lesser-known aftermaths of the disaster. Women volunteers near New York tested early camouflage suits by blending into bushes during World War I. Designers studied how light, fabric, and shadows could hide a human shape, shaping future uniforms and field gear. Royal Navy M-class submarines carried a 12-inch battleship gun, the largest ever fitted to a submarine, to strike surface targets from long range. Only 3 were finished near the end of World War I, and tests showed the idea was impractical next to torpedoes and later aircraft and radar. This unusual device is a Zander machine from the mechanotherapy gyms that spread across Europe and America in the late 19th century. Designed by physician Gustav Zander, it used belts, levers, and adjustable weights to build strength and help recovery long before modern fitness gear. At their kitchen table in the late 1950s, Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talk after a night when a man struck him during a stop in the South. King chose not to press charges, saying he wanted to change the system that shaped such acts. Vin Diesel, in a light suit and narrow tie, sits on the steps of a school in 1985, embodying the street style of the mid-80s. Rolled-up cuffs of trousers, white socks and loafers reflect a combination of preppy and new wave style. A rider pops a wheelie on a homemade chopper bicycle in early 1970s Chicago, with a stretched fork, tiny front wheel, and a tall, sissy bar. The style grew from the easy rider craze in city bike clubs, where teens turned Schwinn's into wild cruisers with chrome add-ons and banana seats. This propeller-driven snow machine from the 1950s rides on skis, pushing across frozen lakes and open tundra like a small airboat on ice. Builders in northern regions used them for mail runs, medical trips, and winter travel long before modern tracked snowmobiles spread. In the late 1960s, a rising martial arts coach fine-tuned a high kick with a Hollywood star during film training. His focus on relaxed hips, a fast snap, and camera-ready form soon shaped how fight scenes were filmed in American movies. This fingerprint card for Alphonse Al Capone shows all 10 prints, several aliases including Al Brown and Scarface, and his signature. Made for law enforcement records in the 1920s and 1930s, it remained on file until his death in 1947. A cabinet card from Brighton, Ontario, shows Leonard W. Whitten, a touring performer often billed as the world's heaviest man, around 1880. Portraits like this were sold as souvenirs at fairs and halls, reflecting the era's fascination with human extremes. This is Buccleuch Avon, bred in Scotland in the 1890s from the St. John's water dog lines. His pups with 2 imported females started the bloodlines that shaped the modern Labrador Retriever. Craftsmen in Britain carry oversized crown models through the street in 1922, built for public displays during the reign of King George V. These light frames were finished with gilded paper and fabric for parades and shop windows marking royal occasions. On a Japanese special effects set, a suit actor walks through a hand-built miniature city, using hidden rails and stage tricks to sell giant scale. This suitmation method soon defined Toho creature films in the 1950s, beginning with the 1954 debut that made the city stomper famous. Rita Hayworth steps into a pearl gown in 1940 that weighed about 30 pounds and cost roughly $250,000. Studios treated such gowns like jewelry, built for dazzling press photos and carefully stored between appearances. On 3 August 1936, Jesse Owens broke the tape in the 100-meter final in Berlin in 10.3 seconds. He went on to win 4 gold medals at the Games: 100 meters, 200 meters, long jump, and the 4x100-meter relay. In the early 1940s, British planners drafted Operation Vegetarian, a secret idea to scatter tainted linseed cakes over German pastures to ruin the cattle supply. Tests on a remote Scottish island showed it could work, but the plan was shelved and the site stayed closed for decades. In 1957, British planners studied a project called Blue Peacock, a buried atomic landmine meant to slow a large armored advance in Germany. One unusual heating idea used live chickens for body warmth inside the steel case, but the plan was cancelled within a year. In the 1950s, U.S. planners tested high-altitude balloons to drift agents across borders and land them quietly inside the Soviet Union. Unpredictable winds, rough landings, and poor control made the idea unreliable, and it was soon dropped in favor of other methods. Johnny Weissmuller, left, and Duke Kahanamoku share a laugh at the Paris Games in 1924. Weissmuller won the 100-meter freestyle, and Kahanamoku, the surfing pioneer and 2-time previous champion, took silver. This is a clockwork spit turner, also called a roast jack, that hung by the hearth to slowly rotate meat over a fire. You wound the spring with a key, and the gears kept the spit turning for even cooking in a 19th-century kitchen. Warrant Officer Pyotr Krisanov of the 4th Siberian Air Detachment stands on winter ice beside his Newport 4 in 1915. He received all 4 classes of the St. George Cross and in 1917 fell in aerial combat after facing two opposing aircraft. A U.S. Marine Corps F-4U-1 Corsair fires a salvo of 5-inch FFAR rockets during a strike on Okinawa in June 1945. Smoke on the shore marks Marine units pushing inland as carrier aircraft hit defenses ahead. German troops use a waterproof tank as a ferry to cross a Russian river on 3 August 1942. Sliding under a shattered wooden bridge, crews sealed hatches, added canvas screens, and used low gears to wade rivers when pontoon bridges were not ready. At the Swan Electric Company in Wellington, New Zealand, women assemble mortar shells on long production lines during the Second World War. Their precise work kept units supplied and showed how home factories shifted to wartime output. A canal worker raises a wooden pile driver to hammer a new mooring post into the mud of the Grand Canal around 1970. Venice sets these paired posts, called bricole, to tie boats and guide traffic along the waterways. Teen typing star Albert Tangora poses with a giant trophy beside his manual machine in 1923. That year, he set a world mark of 141 words per minute on October 22, a speed many modern typists still cannot match. Children gather outside a one-room school on the Seattle frontier in the late 1870s, when the town was a fast-growing lumber port. Classes mixed ages in one space with slate boards, a wood stove, and student chores like hauling water and firewood. A family in southern Ohio poses in 1911 with a new gasoline-powered washer and hand wringer, a big step up from tubs and washboards. Early engines like this cut wash day from many hours to a few, freeing time for farm work and school. At NASA's Lewis, now Glenn, Research Center in 1973, engineers still ran test stands by hand at giant control consoles, while an IBM System 360 in another room processed the data. This mix of human judgment and early mainframe power drove rocket and aircraft research before modern digital labs. Along the tracks near Saskatoon in 1890, workers stacked vast piles of bison bones from the prairie trade. The crates went to England, where the ash and bone powder strengthened fine bone china and fertilizer. During the Dust Bowl in 1936, a farmer and child dig out a fence post in Cimarron County, Oklahoma, as wind-blown soil piles up like dunes. Years of drought and plowing turned fields to dust, pushing families to plant shelter belts and use New Deal help to hold the ground. Drivers stop and watch as a black blizzard rolls over the plains in the mid-1930s, turning day into night within minutes. These storms carried millions of tons of topsoil and pushed towns to plant shelter belts and seek steadier work farther west. A.C. Gilbert's atomic energy lab from around 1950 let kids see particle tracks in a small cloud chamber and hear a Geiger counter click. It disappeared quickly from stores because it was costly and soon replaced by simpler science kits. A cable-operated steam shovel rides on early crawler tracks in 1930, the operator working 3 levers to hoist, crowd, and swing the boom. Machines like this carved basements, laid sewers, and moved coal long before modern hydraulic excavators. A teenager in 1930 holds a protest sign noting he earns $21 a week while his teacher makes $17.78. The blunt comparison captured Depression-era wage strains and early calls for better pay in schools. An early armored diving suit is lifted from the sea in 1930 after a test to 180 feet, the wearer unhurt. These rigid suits used metal joints and surface airlines to keep full pressure inside, letting divers work deeper than soft suits of the day. A station attendant at a Pan American Petroleum Pan Gas stop works a visible pump with a clear measuring cylinder in the 1920s. Fuel was hand-pumped into the glass to measure gallons, then released by gravity into the car before electric pumps became common. The Orient Express ground to a halt in a deep drift near Cherkiskoy, Turkey, during the harsh winter of 1929. Crews and passengers dug for days until plows and extra locomotives cleared the line and freed the luxury train. Harvard professor Harris P. Mosher uses an oversized skull model to teach head anatomy in 1929. Enlarged models let students see sinus passages, nerve paths, and jaw joints clearly long before modern imaging. In 1935, New Yorkers line up at a Harlem desk to volunteer for Ethiopia after Italy's invasion. Thousands offered money and service, but U.S. neutrality rules and passports blocked most from reaching Ethiopia. Reporters crowd around Malcolm Campbell's Campbell-Railton Bluebird in 1935, soon to run over 301 miles per hour. Its sleek body and a supercharged Rolls-Royce R-Type engine helped set the new land speed record on the Bonneville Salt Flats. German cavalry troopers practice mounted rifle fire during maneuvers at the Karlshorst racecourse in Berlin in 1935. Even as tanks and trucks spread, the Army still trained horse units for scouting, messenger work, and rough terrain. Rows of spinning frames fill the American Woolen Company mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1935, each worker tending dozens of fast-moving spindles. Textile mills like this powered New England's economy with shift work, bobbin changes, and constant machine maintenance. On May 4, 1935, the Cavalier Hotel's oceanfront lawn hosted the 6th Cavalier Horse Show in Virginia Beach, with rings set below the Grand Brick Tower. Riders paraded and jumped before local judges as crowds watched from the terrace and hillside. A hand-painted sign advertises a 135-acre farm auction on July 30 in New Carlisle, Ohio in 1935, listing owner Dr. M.C. Moses. During the Great Depression, many family farms went to public auction as crop prices fell and debts mounted. An indigenous Arctic family stands by their summer tent in 1915, a conical shelter stitched from hides and stretched over poles. A sled dog and drying racks in the background show a coastal camp built for warm season travel and fishing.